There is a dark side to the incredible amount of money that the Premier League has. I've talked about this dark side before. The first problem is that no Premier League team seems to want to pay me £500,000 a week, which I find offensive. I feel like I can contribute a lot to the game, and I would be happy to have all of these videos be sponsored by a particular club if they wanted to pay me these kinds of wages. But I will table that. I'll have my people talk to their people. We'll see what we can figure out. Maybe I'll just go for a run in the meantime. I would never. No, seriously. There is a real dark side to the amount of money the Premier League has, because obviously it's good news for the players, right? Because they get these massive contracts. But as Manchester United and now Chelsea is figuring out, those contracts have a downside, because quite often, particularly when you're Chelsea and you give everybody a 25-year deal, they outlive their usefulness. And then you're stuck paying somebody a lot of money that you don't want around anymore. But the problem, obviously, with a contract is that it's kind of a contractual agreement, not kind of, that you have to keep paying that player. And now under FFP, that becomes a really serious problem, because you are continuing to be out that amount of money, but you are getting absolutely no return on the field for it. And that is the situation we find ourselves in with Raheem Sterling, who is quickly becoming one of the most fascinating what the hell happened to him stories in football. Because if you think back to the English national team, right, the 2018 World Cup, the 2020 run to, I guess it was 2021, right, the run to the Euros final. Raheem Sterling was like center picture in that, just cresting into the prime of his career. Sure, it was a meme that he wasn't the best finisher, but it was clear that he was a world-class player, right? He played at an incredibly high level with Manchester City at the club level, and he was leading one of, if not the best national team in the world there for a couple of years as one of the primary offensive options on that team. Now, 4 years later, we find ourselves in a situation where it is likely he won't play a game of first-team football until January. And that's only because that's when the transfer window opens again. That is remarkable, considering Raheem Sterling is not somebody that has been crippled by injuries and is only like 30 years old, maybe 31. He's in that ballpark. But that is late end of the prime of your career, where you're supposed to still be out there making plays, doing big things. But Chelsea signed him in 2022 and gave him a 5-year contract for, I need to find the exact amount here, £325,000 a week. So I want to be clear, even though we're talking about this situation and, like, obviously giving you my, lunchtime thoughts on it, he's doing fine. This guy's making £1 million every, 2.5 weeks. All right, he's doing fine, right? He is having a great time. And even if we're talking about him being frustrated later, I'm aware of the fact, and I'm sure he is also aware of the fact, that he is not in a terrible situation, right? Because he is guaranteed to be getting that money as long as he just sits there. But I don't necessarily think anybody is at fault in this situation. I just think, like I said to start the video, it's the dark side of all of this money, because you give Raheem Sterling, seems like a sure bet, 5-year deal, £325,000 a week. It's like the first big signing for the new owners of Chelsea that have scooped the team up after Abramovich out of uncertainty into spending billions of dollars in order to get the job done. Right, a very fun time for Chelsea when Raheem Sterling comes in, and of course he plays. I believe in this article I was reading here, shout out to Sami Makbal and Nizar Kinsella of the BBC for writing this up. 81 matches, scores 19 times, right? Very regular part of the Chelsea team over the course of 2 seasons, and then Enzo Maresca happens. And this is how it works. I mean, think about the managers. They list them out in this article. Tuchel's the guy that brought him in, then Potter, then Lampard, then Pochettino. Now we're on Maresca. And it becomes clear under Enzo Maresca that Raheem Sterling's not a part of his plans. Sure, he hadn't been playing at the level that he was playing at before. Fall off needs to be studied, but it's not like the Chelsea team overall was that fucking good either. Enzo comes in, and this is just how it works, right? 1 out of 5 managers looks at the team and goes, I don't really feel like we should be using Raheem Sterling all that much. And that manager ends up being the one that's stuck. So maybe he was onto something. Maybe Raheem's not that good anymore. Maybe he's just fallen off a little earlier than you would have expected. But whatever the reason, Maresca looks at the situation and goes, we're not going to use him. They arrange a loan to go to Arsenal because Arsenal's looking at the situation and having the exact same thought process that Chelsea has. Right? He goes to Arsenal for a year. Isn't that great? Mikel Arteta is looking at him like, I don't know if we want to use him. Right? It was a hasty deadline day deal. And it honestly, to me, kind of felt like Raheem Sterling just never found the reason that he was on the team in the first place. He was just kind of there. Right. He was added, when you get too greedy on Football Manager and you sign one too many players and then you're like, shit. Right. Like it felt like one of those situations. So he comes back to Chelsea and now nothing. 2 years left on his contract. And there's all sorts of contributing factors in this type of situation. All right. Raheem Sterling's got a young family. He doesn't want to move them out of London again, right? So teams like Juventus and Bayer Leverkusen obviously are calling types of teams that would love to have a guy like Raheem Sterling on the cheap. And because his contract's so huge, you're not really going to have to pay for him that much, right? You can just bring him on in. But Raheem not necessarily interested in going there because he doesn't want to leave London. Well, there's, fortunately for him, a lot of clubs in London. But not a lot of clubs in London that would probably want to pay 30-year-old Raheem Sterling £325,000 a week to come play for them. I don't know if Crystal Palace is going to be ponying that up. Fulham's going to be ponying that up. They could, but it's probably not a smart team-building tactic when you're not sure if you're going to get the dynamite Raheem Sterling that existed a couple of years ago, once he's been unleashed from his Chelsea shackles. So what happens? Nothing. And I don't blame either group for this, right? Chelsea's brought up a couple of potential moves, and Raheem Sterling has turned those moves down or not been able to negotiate those moves for valid reasons. I mean, Raheem Sterling signed a contract that says he's getting paid this amount of money over 5 years. That is guaranteed. And he is under no obligation, as far as I'm concerned, to have to help the club if the club decides they don't want him anymore. And I don't think Chelsea's being particularly mean. They're not attacking him in public or anything. They have put him in something that's interesting called the bomb squad. And this is not, they're not tactically going in and diffusing bombs here, but he joins apparently Axel Disasi and David Datro Fofana as guys that are like not a part of the actual squad. They train in different areas, right? They have limited access to the training facilities, limited use of first team facilities, which is crazy. Right, but the idea being, the club is making it very clear that you're not a part of the first team plans anymore. But I don't blame the club for this. I think they're doing that in a very reasonable way. Right? They're like, hey, we don't think you have a part to play in this team anymore. We're not going to devote the resources to that, but you're still obviously on the teams. You have access to this, this, and this. And if you want to exist in the bomb squad for 2 years, sure, I guess. There's nothing that Chelsea can do to try and stop that. At all. But it obviously would create a bit of a motivation. If you're somebody like Raheem Sterling or Axel Disasi or David Datro Fofana, you probably want to be playing. And it's now very clear that you're not going to be playing here. So hopefully one of those types of offers materializes, but it might just not. I mean, obviously the price that Chelsea is asking, whatever it is, the percentage on the loan or the whatever. I don't know exactly what they were asking for before. That's going to go down. Right? Not only because Sterling's contract is running out, but because Chelsea is going to get more and more desperate for the move. And Raheem Sterling is going to get more and more desperate, I'm sure, to play. But I don't know if that's going to be enough for him to want to have to move his family or whatever. Because it's not like Raheem Sterling is just after the money. Because if you are just after the money in today's world, you end up in Saudi Arabia. In Raheem Sterling, I would be stunned if there hadn't been a bunch of phone calls from Saudi Arabia about somebody with his name recognition, his just like brand in general. He's like he's the poster child for the person that Saudi Arabia would want to sign. And clearly Raheem Sterling has not agreed to that and wasn't really able to find a way that he was comfortable going to Juventus or Bayer Leverkusen. I hate these situations, honestly. Because I dug into it. I was looking for a reason to be upset with either side. Oh, Raheem Sterling really just doesn't want to play anymore and he's taking the money. Or, Chelsea is being, like Barcelona does, right, sometimes, where they just bully the hell out of a player and it's wicked and nasty. And it's like, well, you signed the damn contract to pay him that money. But this situation, I don't think anybody's at fault here. This is just what happens when you give long, giant contracts to players, and a lot of shit changes in 5 years, especially when you're Chelsea. That's like 40 managers. Right, at Watford, it's 80. So, I mean, it could be worse, right? But there is so much that changes over the course of 5 years that it's just unpredictable. Maybe Raheem Sterling gets worse. Maybe he doesn't fit in Chelsea's system. Maybe he just doesn't like the stadium. I don't know. And it just doesn't end up working out. But this is the dark side of the Premier League, and it's the dark side of Chelsea's strategy, to be honest, because they give a lot of guys long contracts. Now, not a lot of them are this value, right? £325,000 a week is huge. Most of the other contracts, like Mudryk or whatever, lower value, longer contract. But still, when you lock into that long of a contract, and you have a player that has very justifiable reasons for not wanting to just move anywhere in the world to take the next payday and get playing time, things can grind to a halt pretty quickly. And you're not always going to end up in a situation like Harry Maguire's where eventually he just becomes good again or becomes usable again or somebody that's like irreplaceable in the lineup. More often than not, that's not going to happen when you're trying to get rid of somebody that's on a big contract. And I think we're going to see more situations like this in the future where somebody like Raheem Sterling spends the last year or two of his contract just twiddling his thumbs, waiting for an opportunity and then just popping up at West Ham for, in the January transfer window because somebody gets hurt. And honestly, I wish there was, I don't know what the solution is. You could see me try to figure out what the solution is. I just don't think there is. I think this is just, when you employ a strategy, there is always risk. The risk of this strategy is you end up saddled with what is essentially dead cap space in somebody like Raheem Sterling, and nobody's happy about it.